What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Frame. We take current events, cultural phenomena, and other topics and look at them through a biblical frame of mind. My name is Jacob, and I'll be your host for this evening. We have a great show planned for you, so grab your popcorn, buckle up, let's get to it. Well, welcome in. Glad you're joining us this evening. Let's go ahead and introduce our other host that we have for tonight. What's up, Tyler? How are you?
I'm doing great, although I am bereaved. We've lost Lee. 1899, 2024.
Rest in peace, Lee.
125 years strong.
Yep.
He looks so young.
R.I.P. Lee. Well, no, actually, on that note, so our other host, Lee, is taking a brief sabbatical, brief break from the show for a while. He will be back, don't worry. But in the meantime, we're going to be continuing with me and Tyler and Kevin. But we wanted to give that acknowledgement, R.I.P. Lee.
Yeah.
Right.
No issues between any of us. Lee just
there is incredible beef.
Oh my gosh.
There is so much drama and scolding hot tea.
But yeah, Lee's great. Just in case anybody's wondering, he's doing good. He's just got some stuff on his end. He's trying to take care of. Busy schedule. Yeah, but
I'm pretty sure.
I'm excited for tonight.
He's like gonna be Doctor. He's gonna be Dr. Brown soon.
Dr. Lee Brown. It sounds so official.
Yeah, Dr. Brown. We just need a Marty now. How you doing, Kevin? What's up?
What's up? I'm doing all right.
He's always doing all right.
I'm all right.
That's Kevin's thing. He's all right. All right, Kevin.
All right. Most of the time.
Well, hey, tonight we're going to be talking about current recent events in the weather. So, as most of you have probably heard, we've had several hurricanes that have come through, one of which, of note, just did incredible devastation. I've lived in Florida for, a couple decades now, and I have never in my life seen a hurricane go through, like, into the Carolinas and maintain its intensity through that. It's just crazy seeing a storm go through and then not weaken. Like, that's just not normal. And so the Carolinas, the Appalachian Mountains, they were just hit so incredibly hard. I don't know if they've ever been hit this hard by a hurricane. So that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the weather. We're talking about hurricanes. We're going to be diving into some, frankly, pretty touchy topics tonight. But you know us, we don't shy away from the difficult stuff. But I'd like to turn it over to Tyler here for a minute, because Tyler, you're actually up in the Carolinas.
Yeah, so I'm in upstate South Carolina, which we consider the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is, right where they start. So we've got a lot of pretty waterfalls, waterways, all that stuff comes down toward us. Like you, I'm also somewhat from Florida. I've spent a lot of my life there. I was born there. And I'm no stranger to hurricanes. They don't scare me. At least they haven't in the past. And this one honestly caught me off guard. At least in my circles, did not hear a whole lot of buzz about this. And even if I had heard much about it, I probably wouldn't have been concerned. With that history of being from Florida, being used to hurricanes, and knowing that, like, hey, when it comes up into the Carolinas, like through the Gulf, like we pretty much have nothing to worry about. Like you said, we've not had anything like this. The closest thing we've had would have been, I believe it was 1916. Asheville had similar levels of flooding, but that's because two hurricanes kind of tag teamed right around the same time. Similarly, we had a pretty big storm come through the week before this hurricane, soften the ground, added a lot of water to the area. So I think that's also in part why we saw so much devastation. But like you said, I have never seen a hurricane with this intensity this far inland, dumping this much water. This was completely new for me. Just because this area is not built for it. Like, people in our area like to joke about how everybody freaks out about the weather, and like, it's true. Like, whether it's a winter storm with snow, or now a hurricane, it's just like our infrastructure is not made to handle this, like Florida is with hurricanes, or Minnesota with snowstorms. And so it really did a number on us, and especially our neighbors up in Asheville, which I've been to. It's rough up there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Just something that you said there that I do want to point out, because like obviously like Florida was also hit then by Hurricane Milton. And I don't want to seem insensitive to the people that were affected by Milton. Me being in central Florida, we didn't get it as bad because it did kind of what a hurricane normally does when it goes across the middle of Florida. It just starts kind of breaking, and by the time it gets to the middle, even if it makes landfall as a Cat 3, we maybe get Cat 1 winds here. I know a lot of people along the coast were extremely affected. There are a lot of businesses that lost. There were a lot of people that lost property, lost their businesses in both Helene and in Milton due to flooding, due to winds, due to storm surge. And I don't want to diminish that, but also at the same time, the infrastructure is different, and that's the key. Like Florida, we have a history. We understand that hurricanes are part of what we get. It's part of what comes through. It'd be like I kind of think of it in terms of like if you get a blizzard up there in North and South Carolina, y'all have snowplows. You have all the tools that you need to clear the roadways, to take care of a blizzard, to get things back up and running by the next day. Well, okay, maybe not.
not snowplows.
Okay. Versus if Florida, for whatever reason, if we got a blizzard in Florida, we would be lost for weeks. We wouldn't have any idea of what to do. We would have zero way to dig ourselves out. Like, it's just not something that we're prepared for. Same thing with you guys up there. Like, we're prepared for hurricanes. Y'all aren't. The infrastructure just doesn't exist. And so when you get that kind of devastation, it takes so much longer to recover from it. So how are things in Asheville? Because you mentioned that you've actually been there. Like, as someone who, because obviously, like, we see stuff on the news, but we all know that there are multiple sides to stories, and we all kind of know that while the news might give some facts, it's definitely not going to be fully rounded. So, like, as someone who's actually been there, feet on the ground, boots on the ground, what have you seen? What's going on?
Well, yeah. So first, I want to start by kind of contrasting versus like where we're at in the upstate area right now. So like, we are what, 2 weeks removed, 3 weeks removed from Helene at this point.
Yeah, I think it's
and we've nearly fully recovered here in the upstate area. So like Greenville, Spartanburg, Anderson. Sure, there are roads that still have trees like on the side that have yet to be picked up, and so traffic bottlenecks just a little bit, but that's about the worst of our issues here. I was without power for 10 days, and that was really it. That was the primary extent of our issues here. Loss of power, loss of internet, blocked roadways. And like I said, we are 95% back to normal here in the upstate area of South Carolina. I've been to Asheville like every single week since this hurricane has come through, and it is not the same story up there. So just this past week, one of the major roads in Asheville just got its power back. So,
wow.
I mean, yeah, we're talking what, 20 days plus without
crazy.
power. The water situation is, they're under a boil water advisory.
Still?
Yeah, as far as I know, you can't drink the water out of the tap. I mean, I've seen it, bottled it up like one day versus the next, and you've still got light brown water coming out of the tap.
Wow.
for public water. So it's like it's usable in the toilets, but otherwise you want to be using like a Sawyer Mini filter, or boiling, filtering all of that stuff, just to protect yourself. So that's one aspect of it. Um, in the week after, I visited the River Arts District, which got a lot of coverage because it's right along the French Broad River, and the flooding damage that I saw is something that I've never in my life witnessed. And granted, 30 years old, I've not lived a ton of life, but I've still never seen a natural disaster quite like this in person. So we have water lines, like coming up to the very tops of buildings. A coffee shop that I frequent up there, Summit Coffee in the River Arts District, just had two entire brick walls completely swept away.
Wow.
It's just like absolutely insane, the level of devastation that was had in the River Arts District is exactly as bad as you've seen on the news. Businesses are completely gone. There was this one building that was pretty massive, was used for like manufacturing in the area. um, I believe it was related to like paper goods, and it's just
Mm.
gone. I mean, like absolutely gone. Like you don't see anything except for the base and some of the product that was, left in the area. So like that area is just obliterated, and it's going to be a long time before they get it back. Um, you know, 6 inches of mud in certain areas. It's just it's pretty wild. Um,
Yeah, I've seen
there's a
some of those pictures and videos of newscasters as they're walking along and just seeing like I don't think most people have even a concept of what it's of how water could be that deep on a
Yeah.
street when there's not even normally water anywhere present at any point in time on that
Mhm.
street, how it can get 10, 12, 15 feet deep, to the point that it's completely covering storefronts,
Yeah.
and like if you were inside, like you would have drowned because it filled it beyond the ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly hard for me to grasp as well, because it's not like we're talking about just a narrow river channel where, the river rises 10, 12 feet. This is a broad area, like along the River Arts District, where you're probably looking at least three football fields worth of like width. So to think about that much water covering across like that area in terms of width, and then still rising up to 15, 20 feet deep. I i have such a hard time understanding how much water that is. Still, it's
Yeah.
just it's absolutely insane. So downtown Asheville, I don't want to say they're untouched. Downtown Asheville looks about like downtown Asheville has looked in the past decade in terms of like the infrastructure. Like, yes, there were a lot of streets that were closed off because of trees down and lines down. Like, it was okay. And I say that like as nicely as I can, because I understand a lot of people were affected, but the downtown area seemed like it wouldn't have such a long path to recovery, but they're still out of power as far as I know in most of that area of downtown Asheville.
Wow.
Now, when you get closer towards like the Biltmore Village, that's where you start to see a lot more destruction, because downtown Asheville is a bit on a hill, whereas the
Mhm.
Biltmore Village is kind of takes that slope and then bottoms out, and all of the water in that area just kind of came rushing down into the Biltmore Village. And gosh, I saw one video from a local where an entire house was getting carried down with the torrents of water that were coming through. So it's bad in that area.
It's crazy to think about stuff like that where like an entire house could literally just be floating down a river.
Yeah. And
that's insane.
Yeah. Then you get east of Asheville into Swannanoa and Lake Lure and Chimney Rock. That's where entire towns were wiped out. And I mean that with no exaggeration. Like no buildings left standing in Chimney Rock from what I've read, and from what I've seen. It's
I saw this video of this guy who he was going to Chimney Rock, and he actually like he drove I think he drove his like his pickup truck for part of the way, and then he basically at the point where the road was so blocked he couldn't keep going on his pickup truck, so then he pulled out a four-wheeler and he started riding on his four-wheeler, and then it got so bad he couldn't even keep going with his four-wheeler, and he had to hike the rest of the way. And he's showing like this used to be a road, and there's literally just nothing there. It literally just looks like the banks of the river, and he had to like go up through the forest, and he's like, well, here I am, this is Chimney Rock, like this is the rock, there's nothing else, everything else is gone. And I'm just like that's a significant historical site too. Like it's been, sorry, I'm old, I'm a millennial. It was in the Oregon Trail. Like that's how significant of a landmark this is. It was something that it was a stop along the Oregon Trail. And now like the town that was built there around this historical site is just gone.
Yeah. I think for the week following after the hurricane, as far as like major roadways go, I have family that works in trucking. The only way in and out of there was Interstate 26, like the portion that connects from Asheville to like Spartanburg area. That was it. All of the other major interstates that coalesce in the Asheville region, when you have 40 and 240 and all of that, they were essentially trapped, and so there was no way to get goods in except through Interstate 26. And I took some water to one of the shelters there, like in the week after the hurricane, and I was not expecting them to be as low as they were on water. I want to say they had like 10 cases when I got there, and thankfully some other people had pitched in to help purchase cases of water for these shelters. But in the initial days like following, it was looking pretty dire. Not able to get supplies in. You don't have drinkable water. You don't have electricity. Communication was down with the cell towers, and so it really was an epic disaster, to say the least. We've not seen anything like this, I would say, in the U.S. since Katrina. Entire interstates washed away. Just it was complete and total devastation. And so like I would I want to pivot this to the obvious question. Like, what do we make of this as Christians when natural disasters like this occur? When there's death, there's loss of life, there is suffering. These kinds of things are just they're insane, and they're kind of hard to comprehend.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I mean, so I have friends across a lot of different like denominations and different belief structures in terms of like what their backgrounds are and what they think in terms of like suffering and things like that. And I think a really good question of what a lot of people are probably wondering right now and thinking and asking is like, okay, like, is this something where it's like, okay, like this is God's judgment and wrath, or is this just another one of those, it rains on the good and bad alike? Like where do you draw that line? Where do you even start to try to figure that out or think about it? especially like, and I'll be real, like for me, I would have a lot of difficulty, regardless of where I landed on the spectrum. Let's say I believed that it was God's wrath, that it was His judgment being poured out. At the same time, I would have difficulty saying that because it just sounds insensitive, and it's gonna sound like I'm just being judgmental, and like I'm being hateful, and when I could be stepping into help or stepping into love on the people that are affected by this. Like, but yeah, like where do we draw that line? And I think maybe a good question to ask is like, where do we get this idea from as Christians that things like this are God's judgment, are God's wrath, and where do we get the idea that it has nothing to do with God's wrath and it's just part of living life on earth?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that our ideas of judgment, like, God's wrath coming through weather, stem from the flood, from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, things like that. And so it's a natural question for the Christian and the non-Christian to ask, like, if God is good, then why do these sort of things happen? Um, I myself even, corresponded with Lee initially, like afterward, because Asheville had been hit so hard. And so, for people that do not live in this area, you may not know the sort of reputation that Asheville has. They are known for a lot of New Age practice, Wiccan beliefs, uh, homosexuality. Like, it's that sort of stuff is fully embraced there, and it's they kind of take ownership of, weirdness similar to what you might see in like Portland or Austin. So that's kind of the culture that inhabits that place, along with like hippie stuff, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Mountainous outdoor living, those sorts of things. But it does not necessarily have a great reputation in Christian circles in the Carolinas. And so it's only natural that you're going to hear Christians say, like, oh, this is, this is God's wrath on Asheville. And so, like, I was talking with Lee, and I'd asked him, is there any part of you that thinks that, the damage in Asheville might be a judgment of God? I, being a lifelong Christian, understand that, like, the character of God is good. So that sort of question it doesn't necessarily reflect, what I personally believe, but it is something that, you wrestle with these thoughts when you see things like this happen. Um, and I went on to say that, like, part of me believes that all earthly judgment was visited upon Christ on the cross, but then, my mind wandered to the case of like Ananias and Sapphira, which is, post cross. They lie to the church, and as Peter would say, to the Holy Spirit, and they were killed on the spot. And so, like, that idea of, is there any chance that this was a judgment on, the people in Asheville?
Mm.
It's not a fun question to consider if it's true. And so Lee Lee shot me back a message, and he said, he had this conversation like 5 times in the last 2 days, that we were talking about. Yeah, so it's on a lot of people's mind. Was Asheville being judged? It's not hard to see why, if you think that judgment is on the table, if you're familiar with the area. And so Lee's response, and I'm going to read this here. I don't see anywhere that Christ's sacrifice was a judgment. It may have been an atonement for those who would believe, but that's not the same as judgment for the wickedness on the earth.
Mm.
Plenty of that is coming our way. Whether or not this is hard to say for certain, but I feel it could be with how demonic that area is. Judgment isn't on people, it's on the spirits that inhabit a region in the unseen realm. And I thought that was a really interesting take because I hadn't heard anybody necessarily say that when it comes to the whole um, does God still visit judgment upon people on the earth? Um,
Yeah.
I guess question of, is it spirits that are being judged rather than people? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that because this is new to me. This is a new idea to me.
That's a really good point, and I will say I don't know that I've heard I haven't really heard much in terms of like, okay, God's not judging the people; He's judging the spirits that are in the
Mhm.
area. I'm not. I also haven't really heard a whole lot in that realm, but I do think it is important to note the, and I know that this is gonna probably step on some people's theological toes, and I'm sorry. But when it comes to like our theology of suffering,
Mhm.
about like why do bad things happen, like that's kind of ultimately the basic question really at the root of it, and we're applying it to this specific situation, but
Yeah.
overall that question still stands. And I think personally, um a lot of people equate, oh boy. A lot of people take Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and they equate that because of verses in the Bible where it talks about by his sins we were healed. It talks about the punishment for, or the chastisement for our peace was upon him. All of that stuff. And there's this whole idea that, well, because his sacrifice was complete in the sense that we do not owe anything for our sins. We are, by
Mhm.
grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves. It's a gift from God, not by works, so that we don't have any grounds where we can boast. We have nothing in and of ourselves that we can say it's because of me that I'm going to be able to have a relationship with God or get to heaven. It's
Mhm.
all through Jesus. But I think what people have done is they have equated those verses that are talking about our sin and our standing with God in terms of our sin and our ability to have a relationship with him, and they're equating that to our physical situation, our physical plight on earth, and our experience while we're still on this earth.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I hear from a lot of people, in certain circles, is that, well, God wants you well, God wants you whole, and while I believe, yes, God has good plans for you. He says that, Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you. They're plans for good, not for evil. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Technically, that was a promise to Israel, but I do believe that that's a promise to just His people in general. Which we as Christians, there's a whole thing about we've been grafted into the vine, which we can get into another time. But
Mhm.
and so in that sense, I do believe that that applies to us. I do believe that God has good plans for us. I mean, you could even take it to Romans 8:28 and 29. All things work for good for those who are called according to his purpose, who love him and are called according to his purpose. And the important thing to note there is it doesn't say that bad things don't happen. It
Mhm.
just says that anything that does happen, God will work it for good. And you could even take this to the whole predestination versus free will argument, where a lot of people will take the part where it says he predestined us, according to his foreknowledge. But the whole verse says is he predestined us according to his foreknowledge to be conformed into the image of his son. It's not
Mhm.
saying he predestined us to be saved. It's saying that those who he knew would be saved, he also predestined that we would become like Jesus. And
Mhm.
he has set events into motion to help refine us and help us to become more like Jesus. So with that, then you take this whole concept of like, okay, so are you saying that we still have to suffer on this earth? And me personally, I would say yes. Because frankly, and a lot of people will say like, oh well, but the curse was broken under Jesus. And I go, yes, but there were multiple curses.
Yeah.
And
And Jesus himself promises suffering.
yeah,
Granted, it's for the believer, for people who follow in his way, but even then, this idea of those who are chosen by God are still promised suffering. How much
yep.
more so does that mean for the world as a whole? Um, Like suffering will happen in this life.
Exactly. And I would take two big aspects with that to back that up. I mean, one, the most obvious in my mind is we see in the book of Revelation, there's going to be a judgment. There's going to be a physical judgment of God's wrath poured out on the earth at some point. I believe some of it is us reaping our own repercussions of our bad choices, but I believe some of it is also supernatural outpouring of God, where I would say they're miracles, but they're bad miracles, where he is pouring his wrath out on earth. Like, yeah, he said after the flood, he would never flood the earth again, but he said he would never flood the earth again with water. He said he would not destroy it with water. He never said that he wouldn't destroy it. And the end of the book of Revelation tells us there's a new heaven and a new earth because the old ones had passed away. Like, the old earth is gone. It's destroyed. Mm-hmm. And so that, I feel like, is the most obvious reference to use in terms of supporting, like, hey, yeah, God's going to pour out wrath on this earth through various means. But also, in terms of the whole Jesus and suffering aspect, when people are saying, like, the curse has been lifted, I would ask, okay, so, well, if you go back to Genesis and you look at when Adam and Eve fell, and you look at what God told them, there were several things that he mentioned, most notably of which he told Adam, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat. You will have to toil and work, and the ground is going to produce thorns and thistles and weeds. So I would go, okay, well, if I, as a Christian, if I am under the blood of Jesus and the curse has been lifted and I go to plant food for my family, why do I still get weeds in my garden?
Yeah.
Why do I still have to toil with sweat? Yeah. Why can't I just plant a seed in the dirt and it just grows miraculously because I'm not under the curse? And then also with Eve, he says, and by pain, you will bear children. You will have pain in childbirth. Like, and a lot of people will argue, like, well, maybe that was already going to be the case. For me personally, I would argue against that, because if you look at nature, the majority of animals do not have pain in childbirth. This might seem a little graphic, but the majority of animals, giving birth is like taking a dump.
Yeah.
It's a prolonged dump. It's a giant dump. But for the majority of them, it's like taking a dump. It's not this thing where they're laying on the ground screaming their lungs. Guys, I have
Is this one going into the YouTube Shorts? Kevin,
absolutely.
This is the highlight. This is we're gonna make the quote for the week.
Oh yeah.
And so I would say, like, I would argue that looking at the rest of creation, I would say that's what it was supposed to be like. And God even told her, like, as he was in the process of, these are things that are happening. These are consequences that are happening as a result of your actions. And that was lumped into that. And so just from a grammatical standpoint, it fits within the consequences. So then I would also ask, well, then why do Christian women still have pain in childbirth? If we're free from the curse, why did my wife suffer through having children?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that so I would argue that stuff in terms of suffering, and in terms of whether or not, as far as whether we are exempt from certain kinds of suffering, because a lot of people will say, like, well, the suffering that Jesus was talking about was suffering at the hands of other people. And I would say, so, but then still, according to that theology, we should be exempt from all of this kind of suffering, from quote unquote natural suffering that's not inflicted by other people. So if that's the case, then why do we do that, unless that's not the case?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so when I think of suffering, my mind goes back to Genesis and the garden. So we commonly hear, like, how can a good God allow X, Y, Z from, people who don't believe? And what I really wish they could understand and grasp is that everything that is evil, that is wrong in this world, suffering, illness, natural disaster, that was not the intention for this world.
Right.
And it all came through the fall and through sin. It is because of sin that we have death. It is because of sin that we have disease and, natural disasters. All of these other things, like this world is imperfect because of sin, because sin brought it into this world. So it was not the design, but now we are under that curse of sin. That's why we see these things. And so, the Bible talks about how the wages of sin are death. And I think we have to accept that, like, as long as we are in this world, until the new heaven and the new earth, that is our reality while we are here, and that no one is exempt from that. Because of sin, everything that was outside of God's design for man is something that we just have to put up with. All of the suffering, all of the death, all of the natural disasters. And so it's like, as unfortunate as all of this is, that is a part of life. And what Jesus promises to us is the peace to make it through these situations, is, eternal life, by way of knowing him and having
Yep.
relationship with God, with the creator of the universe. And so, no, we don't get to escape the suffering. In in many ways, we are promised more suffering. Um, and we live a pretty comfortable life here in America for the most part as Christians,
Yeah.
but um, yeah, we're not exempt at all.
I would agree. And I think it is a really important thing to note that when it comes to suffering, just like you said, the important thing is that we have this relationship with God and that we trust him in the middle of whatever is happening.
Hmm.
I mean, uh James, the book of James, first chapter, he talks about count it all joy when you go through trials and tribulations, because the testing of your faith produces patience. And then patience, when it has had its perfect work in you, will make you perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And so the idea with that is that, like, hey, when you go through a trial, when you go through something difficult, your faith is what carries you through. And when your faith is tested, that is what produces patience and
Hmm.
helps refine you and helps you grow closer to God. Because as you exercise your faith, you grow closer to God. You grow in your relationship with him. And honestly, I feel like the first chapter of James is all just perfect for this whole situation, because then it goes on, it talks about um, no one should say that they're tempted by God, because God doesn't tempt anyone. But furthermore, every good gift and every perfect gift is from God. That it, like he says that. He's like, if you have anything good in your life, it's from God. God only gives good gifts. Jesus even said that when he was here. He talked about how, like, hey, how many of you would, if your kid asked for a piece of bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asked for some fish to eat, would give him a serpent? And like, what he's actually talking about there is like a poisonous snake that could actually bite and kill your kid. He's like, you in comparison to God, we in comparison to God are
Hmm.
evil. And he says, if you being evil know how to give good gifts to your kids, how much more do you think God, who is perfect, knows how to give good gifts to his children? And so, but also at the same time, that doesn't mean that we don't go through hard times. There are still, I mean, as a parent, if I bail my kid out of every single situation and I put my kid in this protective bubble and I make it so that he can never get hurt, or my daughter, that she could never get hurt, they're never going to grow.
Yeah.
Like, part of growth is falling and skinning your knee. Part of growth is banging your head on the cabinet or on the couch when you stand up because you weren't thinking about where you were looking. And if I just make it so that they can never have those kinds of experiences, well, then when they get to grow up and they go out into the real world, they're just going to end up getting hit harder, and
Yeah.
the wounds are going to be deeper. Whereas if I allow them to go through small injuries, it helps them grow as a person and prevents bigger injuries later. Now, I want to clarify, that is not me saying that I believe God puts you into bad situations. That is not me saying I believe God puts you in trials, because again, the Bible tells us that he doesn't. What I do believe, though, is that he knows they're going to happen. And while he's not causing them, he allows you to go through it because of the fact that if you allow that faith to work through the situation, you will come out better. You will come out closer to him. You will come out healthier. You will have come out growing on the other side of it. And ultimately, it will make you more like Jesus. Now, if you don't believe in Jesus, I'm sorry, you're just getting hurt.
Yeah. I think, like, my perspective on the things that we have to suffer with in this world, especially at the hands of other people, is, again, this is related to sin. These are things that are not caused by God when, somebody, let's say, commits a murder or, rapes, something along those lines. These are not actions that are like sent to us by God, but we ask these questions like, oh, why was I not rescued from that? Why was I not spared from that? And like, yes, those are hard questions to ask and hard to answer as a believer. It goes back to the fact that sin is in control of this world. Like, Satan rules over this world right now, and so, like, we don't get to experience this perfect carefree life right now. We have to endure. I think that the Bible is consistent about teaching that, like, as Christians, we don't get to escape, but we are taught how to endure and how to persevere and how to have hope, and how to not lose all hope in spite of those circumstances, that we have something to live for and something to offer the world in spite of those circumstances. I feel like we could keep going on and on about this subject of suffering for a while, but there was also some interesting theories that sprung up out of this whole weather pattern situation. So, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know how deep we want to go on this.
I'm probably just going to go
I forgot my tinfoil personally.
Yeah, I didn't bring my tinfoil hat. I could probably go make one. I mean, I've heard all kinds of stuff, and I've sorry, Kevin, I didn't give you any like pages or documents or anything to look up. One thing I would be curious to look up is one thing that has come up a lot is experiments with dry ice when it comes to hurricanes and storms, and like weather seeding. And there's always these questions. I mean, like, so I know a lot of people were asking questions with the hurricanes, like, hey, so this NOAA flight, NOAA, came out and it's like circling around inside the hurricane, and then they went away, and then within 6 hours, the hurricane intensified significantly. And I go, well, it's not weird for the planes to go flying around. That's part of how we get the more accurate reports, and that's why the reports aren't constant. They come out every several hours. They're updated with the latest wind speeds and everything, and a lot of that is because they are flying the planes into it to gather the intel. But at the same time, here's the tinfoil hat. What if that's a ruse? What if there's a double purpose there? What if there's the aspect of, oh yeah, we're going to read it, but we're also, there is that question. And I mean, there have been studies that show that the weather, we can affect the weather, we can impact the weather. And so there's kind of I would say a two-sided question here, because the one side is, how much do we think they impacted it? obviously they didn't cause the hurricane, but how much did they potentially impact its strengthening and its duration? But also, like, hey, if we do have the ability to at least somewhat impact the weather, why aren't we taking bigger measures to put negative impacts on these hurricanes to weaken them?
Yeah, so I have I wouldn't necessarily call this special insight because there are probably billions of people around the world who already know about this. But it may come as a big surprise to a lot of people to know that weather control is a very, very real thing. Now,
Yep.
to the extent of controlling hurricanes, I don't know enough to say that that is possible. But cloud seeding has been done in China for decades now.
Yep.
Before the Beijing Olympics, um, secondhand account, somebody that I know very well and is very trustworthy, worked at the U.S. Embassy over in Beijing. They,
Nice.
anytime Obama would visit, they would cloud seed, which I'm gonna dumb down the science. They would release particles into the clouds that would cause the smog clouds to turn into rain, basically washing all of the smog out of the sky and clearing up the skies. And so, if that sort of weather manipulation or weather control is possible, um, what else can they do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my mind, it is not outside of the realm of possibility that you could theoretically change atmospheric pressures in a certain area to further affect weather. Now, again, what sort of technology would you need to make that happen? The resources involved, how effective could it possibly be? I have absolutely no idea, and I somewhat doubt that we could orchestrate anything like that on a scale that would affect a hurricane. I'm very doubtful and skeptical of that. So to me, where I fall on this, as much as I love conspiracies, I just don't see this one holding water as of right now. Somebody would have to give me some really, really good, like hard data to convince me otherwise. But um, to completely laugh off the idea of weather manipulation in general, especially when we already have cloud seeding that's been done for decades now, I think is kind of silly. We've we've got to accept that we live in the Jetsons world now. Like we are quite literally controlling the weather in certain aspects. Again, the idea that the government or something like that is trying to intentionally harm people with it, that's you're going to need some hard evidence for that. That's
Yeah.
that's all I will say. So
Sure. I think, and I would agree on the one hand, like, I think it'd be a big jump to go from cloud seeding to affecting something as massive as a hurricane.
mhm.
At the same time, though, it's been 80 years almost. It was in the night they started experimenting with cloud seeding back in the 1940s.
Okay.
And so there's also the aspect of this where I go, how have we been investigating this for 80 years, but we still only have that small of an impact? Like, I feel like there should have been an advancement. And I'm sorry, Kevin, that with the way that my screen currently is, that is way too small for me to read it. I'm gonna need you to read it to us. Tell us what you're showing us.
I'm just backing you up with evidence. This is from the Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorology Laboratory, NOAA.gov, for anyone who wants to question me on my sources.
Nice. Oh yeah, I think that's the experiment I was referencing.
Yeah.
And
so this is in 1947. It's one of the first, or is the first, attempt at controlling. What they were trying to do is weaken the hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
And so they flew a B-17 into a hurricane 415 miles east of Jacksonville. They dumped several pounds of dry ice into the storm, and it didn't work
Does it
very
mention
well.
what storm, or does it have a graph of the storm's path
So this
anywhere in
is
there?
1947 Hurricane King,
So in the
King.
and I want you to sit on that graphic right there for a second, because that's the important graphic, and this is the interesting thing that a lot of people are talking about when it comes to this experiment, is they dropped the dry ice in there. Hang on, Kevin.
No, I know.
Oh,
This
okay.
is the important part.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if NOAA is officially acknowledging it as a cause, or if they're simply saying this happened. It's a correlation, but I know as far as the general public goes, they're blaming that massive left hook of the hurricane on that experiment, because it was very shortly after they did that, where they flew into the hurricane with the dry ice, that it suddenly it went from that nice little where it's kind of just curving up, and then suddenly it just goes whoosh, and it just takes a hook straight left and goes inland. A lot of people think that that's because of the dry ice, and I think it's simply a matter of we haven't done enough experiments for them to determine whether that's the cause or not. But it is definitely interesting.
Yeah. It's too bad we can't like create miniature hurricanes in labs and
Which
test
also,
on them that way.
why not? That's where I tinfoil hat, where I go, with all of the different things that we can test and all the different things that we can experiment with and all the different types of conditions, like we can make, like they literally have like a giant pool that can simulate massive waves for the sake of training, like Coast Guard training and other things like that, and testing just like ships and how they'll hold up in different materials. But we can't simulate a hurricane and or type of conditions in some giant laboratory so that we can test cause and effect of treatments. That's right. That's where my tinfoil hat is just the, I feel like we should be able to. Why haven't we?
Yeah, I have no idea. No clue.
Which then begs the obvious question, are we? And we're just not talking about it? Is that one of those, like, I mean, a lot of this stuff is funded by Department of Defense. And so, or at least comes from some kind of military related funding. And so it does beg the question, like, well, hey, if it's military related, we know that when it comes to US military, at least, we are not going to acknowledge the existence of a military weapon until we are willing for our enemies to possess the technology, which means that we already have technology that's superior to it. So at the point that we what's the word? Declassified, that's the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
At the point when we have declassified like a certain, like say a fighter jet, we declassified it because we already have a better fighter jet.
Yeah.
That we're not talking about. And so that's where I go, when it comes to stuff like this, like Area 51, guess what? You've never heard of Area 49. I guarantee you if there's an Area 51, there's an Area 49. Like, I'm sorry, our government's not that original when it comes to stuff like that, but we don't know where Area 49 is. We don't know what Area 49 does. We don't know what's there. Like, and I'm just picking.
Yeah.
I am picking the number 49 as a random number. There is nothing associated with the number 49 as far as I know, okay? Just making sure I put that out there. But like my point is like what if we do have the capability? What if we do have the technology, but we're obviously not acknowledging it because we don't want to run the risk of other countries getting their hands on it?
Yeah, I mean, so my question would be, what's the advantage of having that scale? Like, would we dump resources into that? What would we get out of it? The only thing that makes sense is to divert hurricanes away from
Right.
the American populace, not to direct them toward. Now you have to have, some very nefarious impressions of our government. Which, granted, I don't trust our government in the least bit, because most people are, power hungry and selfish
We're
in
human. Yep.
those yeah, in those worlds. But you also have to think that, like, anytime a natural disaster strikes U.S. soil, that is hundreds of millions of dollars that we have to dump out in aid, from our budget, which I don't necessarily think we're inclined to spend that if we don't have to. It doesn't quite make sense to me. The idea of that motive. Now, I know a lot of people are saying this is, like, part of the election, like trying to keep people from voting. Okay, maybe. I just, like, I'm so doubtful of this. I don't really put much stock in this particular theory.
Yeah.
Um but I am on the side of, like, hey, let's not stick our heads in the sand completely when it comes to the idea of weather control. I would like to know more about what's out there, because there is some very real weather manipulation that, we've been doing for a long time now. It's just, I guess the question that we all have now is, like, to what extent are they able to do it,
Yeah.
that, that we may or may not know about. But
And
anyways,
it's also
that's all of my
possible
thoughts on it.
it's also possible that it's not our government doing it either, because I know you've probably heard some of these conspiracies too. There's a whole thing about there's a mountain with a giant lithium deposit that
Yeah.
apparently BlackRock or some other company recently acquired, and acquired the rights to go ahead and mine it. And it's like very close, if not dead center of some of the most impacted areas. And so there's part of the conspiracy is that, oh, well, hey, this giant conglomerate private company just acquired the land rights, or just acquired the mining rights, and so this was an easy way for them to be able to swoop in and buy all the surrounding land, by making it devastation and going in and basically bailing people out. But part of that
Mhm.
bailout would mean that all those people are moving. And so, like you said, like, yeah, I think it'd be hard to believe that our government would do something like that that would cost them billions upon millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. But would a giant conglomerate private company be willing to do it, knowing that they'll make billions of dollars off the result?
Yeah. I mean, again, I would be doubtful. No, I have zero doubts that they would take every advantage that they could to go in and swoop up that property after the fact. But causing a disaster, again, I just don't see how that would be possible. As far as, like, diverting weather there. Um I just don't see it.
Yeah,
But like I said, swooping in after the fact and taking advantage of it, like, not caring at all that they're displacing people if they have an opportunity to buy that area. Yeah, you know, I 100% would bet on the side of them doing whatever it would take to make more money.
yeah. So I do have one more question for you. Again, since you are physically closer to the area, and you've seen some of the, like, support efforts and aid efforts that are
Mhm.
happening up there, what would you say would be the best way for people who, if they have a desire to help, but they can't physically make it there, or it's just too much to physically make it there? Even if they can, it might not be the best idea for them to try to personally go, because they'd be clogging up the roadways and stuff.
Mhm.
As far as what you know, as of organizations that are in the area, what's the best way that people can partner with, if they want to help out, the people affected by this, to send supplies or to send finances, what are some of the organizations that are on the ground that you would recommend they either donate through or give to? Or who are some organizations that, if they want to get personally involved more than just finances, that they could reach out to find a way to get plugged in?
Yeah. So the Red Cross is on the ground with several of the shelters in the area. So I know that is one avenue. I personally would recommend reaching out to some churches in the area, like Boiling Springs First Baptist Church. They are a church that we partner with, and they had a guy flying out supplies with his helicopter to the area. So finding a church that is connected with the area, that knows people that are in need, and reaching out to them is a really good way to find out, like, hey, what sort of resources are needed right now, and how can we support them and get those to them. So, like, things that are going to be needed, that are already needed just because it's starting to drop in temperature: blankets, coats, jackets. There's like evergreen needs, like fresh water and diapers and wipes and stuff like that. Kind of those little items that we kind of take for granted, towels. There's an endless list of things that are needed in the area by different groups of people. Um, Again, recovery is happening, but it's going to be very slow for this area. In my estimation, this probably set Asheville back 40 years
Wow.
economically. People are moving out, businesses are shut down. Now it could recover very quickly. It absolutely could. I have no doubts that people will dump money into it and invest in this area and try to I, I don't say this negatively, but cash in on the rebuild of Asheville.
Yeah.
Uh, and there are people who live there who heart wise, they are invested in the area, so they will do what they have to rebuild. So I wouldn't be surprised if it bounces back very quickly. But again, I would say that we probably set the clocks back at least 40 years for this area, because Asheville was growing uh, pretty quickly. This whole Western North Carolina hub that centers around Asheville, and there was just so much damage that was done in the area that it's going to be a long, long time, and a lot of people are just opting to move out completely.
Yeah.
So it's sad, but um, get in
It's
contact
crazy.
with churches, get in contact with organizations like the Red Cross, who are actually, operating the shelters there. Um, that would be my recommendation. AB Tech, Asheville Buncombe Tech, they are utilizing their campus and their spaces for these shelters, so you can also reach out to them.
That's awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
All right. So, final thoughts. How do we? I mean, I know kind of from a we talked somewhat about making sure that we're putting our trust in God, allowing our us to lean into our faith in circumstances like this, in times like these, so that we can continue to grow in our relationship with Him. But beyond that, is there anything else that we can apply what we've talked about today on a day to day basis, or does it kind of sit there in terms of trust God, allow your faith to grow, and do what you can to help people?
I think, um, if there is a silver lining to take out of this situation, it is a remembrance of our mortality and the I guess the frailty of our lives here. Not necessarily the word I want to use, but just how quickly things can change. You know, in our heads, we always have tomorrow. We're always looking forward to the future, and we don't know these sorts of catastrophic events that could enter our lives at any moment. And I think we lose sight of that. we expect a future in a sense.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I would say, remember that we are mortal, that we have no power over what happens to us in life when it comes to events like this and
Yeah.
things happening to us. Um, and so, like, we need to have our faith and our hope and our trust in something that is eternal. And there is peace that can be found, there is hope that can be found in the name of Jesus. And, it's a solid rock. It's something
Hmm.
that will stand, that has always stood, and we can count on Jesus to not not wipe away the suffering, but to allow us to walk through it and to grow and to be better on the other side of it. So that's what I would say.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, and I would just add on with that. If you've been affected by the hurricane and you're wondering where God is right now and what's going on, I hope you didn't take away from what we said today, that God's judging you and there's no hope and you're being punished. I mean, ultimately, our heart is to point you to Jesus, and He came full of both grace and truth. But ultimately, the biggest thing with that is the fact that He loved you so much. He loved us so much that He was willing to lay down His life, because no amount of suffering that we go through can ever repay the debt that we owe, that is caused by our sin separating us from God. The only way to get back into right relationship with God is through Jesus. And the thing is He promises hope. He promises freedom from our sin. And while He doesn't promise that we'll be free from suffering, He does promise that He will be with you every step of the way. I think we would all agree that there's a big difference between going through a problem by yourself and going through a problem with a trusted friend. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is Jesus is that trusted friend. He's the one that never fails us. He's the one that never gives up on us. And He does have the power to carry you through. And so if you've been feeling hopeless, if you've been feeling depressed, down, feeling like you've been forgotten, or feeling like there's no hope, I want to tell you there's hope in Jesus. And yeah, that's not going to help you rebuild your house. That's not going to help you replace your car. Maybe you lost loved ones. That's not going to bring them back. But it can bring comfort, and it can bring hope for the future, and the understanding of that He has promised that things will work out for you, for your good in the end, if you love Him. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't made that decision to follow Him, and you've been feeling that way, and there's a tug that you're feeling right now, where you're like, yeah, like I could use some hope. I just want to tell you, it's there. Just believe in Him. Choose that you want to follow Him. That's all that He asks. He doesn't want anything that you have to give. He just wants you. That's it. That's all He asks for. And there's hope and there's healing in Jesus. So with that, Kevin, any final thoughts that you have?
I'm tired.
I got you. Hey, also, like, hey, if you're watching this later on, like, leave some love for Kevin in the chat here, down in the comment section, because he does a lot to make this podcast happen. He is the guy behind the keyboard, the guy in the chair. He's the one that's making all the video transactions. In the words of Spider-Man.
Well, his guy in the chair said that.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. Thank you. You're correct. But yeah, give him some love in the comments. Let him know that he's appreciated, because he's really making all this happen from a tech standpoint. All the video transitions, sound stuff, he's the one that makes it look good and sound good. So show him some love. Tell him you appreciate him in the comments. We definitely appreciate you, Kevin. And Lee, if you happen to be watching this, exactly. Lee, we love you and we look forward to having you back soon, sometime in the next few months. It is going to be some time, folks, but don't worry. Lee is coming back, and when he does, it's going to be great. I mean, it's already great, but it's going to be even better. So, all right. Well, with all that said, thank you all once again for joining us. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe to the channel. Throw us a comment if you got a couple seconds to do that. It really helps out the algorithm and all that kind of stuff. Rate the show wherever you happen to be listening, whether that's on YouTube, podcasts, wherever else you might be. Also, we want to interact with you. Send us your questions. Send us topics you'd like us to address. What issues do you care about and want clarity on how to live as a Christian? If you have a pressing question or a topic like that, drop it in the comments. Let us know. We want to hear from you. And with that, though, we love you guys. We'll see you next time. Have a great night.